Welcome back to Vietnamese Vixens. Today's story comes from Thomas, a 44-year-old mechanical engineer from Munich, Germany, and it's one of the most devastating submissions we've received. Thomas thought he'd found his second chance at love after a painful divorce left him hollow and alone. He met Lynn during a business trip to Hanoi, a beautiful, educated woman who seemed different from everyone else. She spoke decent English, worked at a boutique hotel, came from what she called a good family, and made him feel alive again. They married within a year. He brought her to Munich, built a life together. For 3 years, he believed in their future. Then, on the day he was about to sign their divorce settlement, a generous agreement giving her 45,000 euros, roughly 1.4 billion Vietnamese dong, plus half their apartment equity, he overheard a phone conversation that destroyed everything he thought he knew. This is his story. If you're watching from abroad and you've experienced something similar, drop a comment below with where you're from. Like and subscribe if this hits close to home, because this cautionary tale might save someone you love. My name is Thomas Schmidt. I'm 44 years old, and I work as a mechanical engineer at BMW's manufacturing division in Munich. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I'm not stupid. I have 2 engineering degrees. I've worked on complex systems that most people couldn't begin to comprehend. I've managed teams, solved problems, built things that actually matter. But none of that protected me from what happened. None of that made me any less of a fool. My first marriage ended when I was 38. Sarah left me for a colleague, someone more emotionally available, she said. Someone who actually showed up in the relationship, not just physically, but mentally. I didn't fight her on it, because deep down, I knew she was right. I'd thrown myself into work after we married, used career advancement as a shield against actual intimacy. When she left, I told myself I'd learn from it. I'd be better next time. But there wasn't a next time for years. Just work. Long hours at the plant, business trips, an empty apartment in Schwabing that echoed when I walked through it at night. I met Lynn in November 2021. I'd been sent to Hanoi for 3 weeks to consult on some manufacturing processes at a parts supplier we were evaluating. The project was tedious, the usual efficiency assessments and quality control protocols. But Hanoi itself felt alive in a way Munich never did. The motorbikes, the street food vendors at dawn, the way the whole city seemed to hum with this barely contained energy. I stayed at a boutique hotel in the old quarter, nothing fancy but clean and well managed. Lynn worked the front desk. I noticed her the first day because she was reading a French novel during a quiet moment, something by Camus, and when I checked in, she spoke English with this slight French accent that I later learned came from studying hospitality management in Dalat. She was 26, though I didn't know that then. She had this way of making eye contact that felt different from the polite customer service smiles I was used to. It felt like she actually saw me. We started with small talk. Where was I from? How long was I staying? Did I need restaurant recommendations? The usual. But then she asked what kind of engineering I did and seemed genuinely interested when I explained. Most people's eyes glaze over when I talk about manufacturing processes, but she asked follow-up questions. Smart questions. She told me her father had worked in a textile factory before he died, that she understood the precision required in making things. That small connection felt significant somehow. By the 3rd day, I asked if she wanted to get coffee after her shift. She said yes. We went to a tiny place near Hoan Kiem Lake, sat on plastic stools that were too small for me, drank strong Vietnamese coffee that made my heart race. She told me about her family. Her father had died 2 years earlier from lung cancer. Her mother worked as a seamstress, barely making ends meet. She had a younger brother, 19, studying business at a local college. She helped pay his tuition by working 2 jobs, the hotel during the day and occasional translation work at night. I asked about the French novel. She smiled, said she loved French literature, had taught herself French through YouTube videos and library books because she dreamed of visiting Paris someday. There was something about her that felt unguarded, honest. She didn't play games. When I asked if she wanted to have dinner the next night, she said yes without pretense. No waiting 3 days to text back, no calculated distance, just yes. That dinner turned into a week of dinners. She showed me Hanoi the way locals see it. The pho shop that opened at 5 in the morning, the temple hidden behind a maze of apartment buildings, the lake at dawn when older people practiced Tai Chi in the mist. She held my hand on the 4th night, tentatively, like she was checking if it was okay. I squeezed back. Something in my chest unlocked for the first time in years. When my 3 weeks ended, leaving felt wrong. We'd spent almost every evening together. She'd taken 2 days off work just to show me Ha Long Bay, paid for her own bus ticket even though I offered to cover it. She said she wanted to contribute, didn't want me to think she was using me. That mattered to me. That's what made her different. Back in Munich, I couldn't stop thinking about her. We messaged constantly on WhatsApp. Good morning texts, photos of our days, video calls every night where we'd just talk for hours about nothing and everything. She told me about her childhood, growing up poor but loved, how her father used to take her to the park on Sundays and buy her sugarcane juice, how her mother cried when he died because he'd been the steady one, the planner, and now everything felt uncertain. I told her things I'd never told Sarah, about feeling invisible in my own life, about the pressure to be successful, to climb the ladder, to prove something I couldn't even name, about loneliness that felt like a physical weight. She listened. She didn't try to fix me or tell me I was wrong for feeling what I felt. She just listened and said, "You're not invisible to me." 6 months of long distance. I visited 3 more times, each trip for a week or two. Used vacation days I'd been hoarding for years. Each visit deepened something between us. She introduced me to her mother, a small woman with sad eyes and work-worn hands who held my hand across the table and said something in Vietnamese that Lynn translated as, "Thank you for making my daughter smile again." The mother lived in a cramped apartment in a building that leaned slightly, paint peeling from the walls, furniture that had seen decades of use. But it was clean, dignified. They served me tea in chipped cups and treated me like I mattered. Lynn never asked for money, not once. When her mother needed medicine, she mentioned it only when I pressed her about why she seemed stressed. When her brother's tuition was due, she talked about picking up extra shifts. I offered to help. She refused at first, said it wasn't my responsibility. I insisted. €200 here, 300 there. It felt good to help, to be needed. Sarah had never needed me, not really. She'd had her own career, her own money, her own life that intersected with mine but didn't require me. Lynn's vulnerability felt like trust. I proposed in July 2022. Did it properly, with her mother present, in their small living room with a gold ring I'd bought in Hanoi's old quarter. Nothing extravagant, just a simple band because Lynn had said once she didn't like flashy jewelry. Her mother cried and held both of our hands and gave us her blessing in Vietnamese. Lynn translated, tears streaming down her face. She says my father would have loved you. She says you have kind eyes. We married in August, small ceremony, just family, at a local district office. No big celebration because Lynn said she didn't want to waste money on a party when we needed to save for her visa application. That made sense to me. She wore a white AO dye her mother had sewn, simple and beautiful. I wore a suit I'd brought from Munich. We took photos by Hoan Kiem Lake afterward. In those photos, she's smiling up at me, and I'm looking at her like she hung the moon. Because that's how it felt. The visa process was brutal. 8 months of paperwork, documents notarized and apostilled, embassy interviews in Hanoi where they asked intrusive questions about our relationship. How did we meet? How often did we see each other? Why did I want to marry a Vietnamese woman? The implication was always there, hanging in the air like smoke, that she was using me, that I was naive. I ignored it. They didn't know her. They didn't know us. During those 8 months, I visited twice, sent money regularly for her mother's medical bills, for her brother's tuition, for repairs on their apartment building's roof. Never large amounts, never anything that felt suspicious. Just helping family. Because that's what she was now, family. She arrived in Munich in December 2022. I picked her up from the airport in thick snow. She'd never seen snow before, not real snow, and she stood outside the terminal, letting flakes land on her black hair, shivering in a jacket too thin for Bavarian winter. I wrapped my coat around her. She pressed into me and whispered, "I'm here. I'm really here." I felt like I'd won something impossible. Those first months were exactly what I'd hoped for. My apartment became a home. She cooked Vietnamese food that made the whole building smell like lemongrass and fish sauce. My neighbors complained once, but I didn't care. She decorated with small touches, plants on the windowsill, framed photos of us, bright pillows on the gray couch I'd had for a decade. She studied German intensively, attended classes 3 times a week, practiced with me in the evenings. Her accent was terrible, but her determination was beautiful. We explored Munich together. Christmas markets where she marveled at glühwein wine and roasted almonds. Beer gardens in spring where she gamely tried Weissbier and made faces at the taste. Weekend trips to Neuschwanstein Castle, to Salzburg, to the Alps where she saw real mountains for the first time and cried at the scale of them. She was affectionate, held my hand in public, initiated intimacy, laughed at my bad German puns, made me feel young in a way I hadn't felt since my 20s. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Even my mother, who'd been skeptical about the marriage, warmed up after meeting Lynn. Lynn brought gifts, spoke respectfully in halting German, asked questions about my childhood. My mother later told me, "She's trying, Thomas. That's what matters." It felt like validation. See, I wanted to tell everyone who doubted, see, this is real. The cracks started small. So small, I almost didn't notice them. About 6 months after she arrived, her mother needed surgery. 800 euros. I sent it immediately, no questions. 2 months later, her brother's tuition had increased. 1,200 euros, of course. Family comes first. A month after that, their building's roof was leaking badly, making the apartment unlivable. 2,000 euros for emergency repairs. I noticed the amounts were growing, and the emergencies were frequent. But I rationalized it. Vietnamese culture values family obligation more than Western culture does. I was the wealthy German husband now. This was my role. Lynn changed in ways I told myself were just adjustment. She stopped going to German classes after passing the B1 exam, said she'd continue studying at home, but I never saw her practice. She became less interested in exploring Munich, preferring to stay in the apartment on her phone, video calling friends in Vietnam for hours in rapid Vietnamese. I couldn't follow. She stopped initiating intimacy. When we did have sex, it felt perfunctory, like something she was enduring rather than enjoying. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, just homesick, just adjusting, just tired. Our conversations became shallow. How was your day? Fine. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. Do you want to go out this weekend? If you want. She wasn't hostile, just absent. Like she was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. I blamed myself. Maybe I was working too much again. Maybe I was repeating the same mistakes from my first marriage. Maybe she was depressed and needed professional help. I suggested therapy. She refused. Nothing's wrong, she said in flat, emotionless German. I just miss home. By the second year, our relationship had become transactional in a way I couldn't quite name. I worked, paid bills, sent money to Vietnam. She cooked occasionally, kept the apartment clean, existed in the same space as me but not with me. The warmth had drained out of everything. I still loved her, or I loved who she'd been in Hanoi. I kept thinking if I just waited, if I was just patient enough, that version of her would come back, that the woman I married was still in there somewhere, buried under culture shock and homesickness. I held on to that belief like a drowning man holds on to driftwood, because the alternative was too painful to consider, that I'd been wrong about everything from the start. The financial bleeding got worse in year 2. Not dramatically at first, just steadily, like a wound that won't quite close. Her mother had another medical emergency in March. 3,000 euros for a procedure that couldn't wait. Then in May, her brother needed a laptop for his business courses. 800 euros for something decent that would last. In July, the laptop wasn't enough. He needed a motorbike to get to his internship across Hanoi. 2,500 euros. Every request came with explanations, with apologies, with Lynn showing me messages in Vietnamese that I couldn't read, photos of hospital paperwork I couldn't verify, receipts for things I had no way of confirming. I started asking more questions, not accusations, just questions. Can we video call your mother to see how she's recovering? Lynn would say the internet at her mother's apartment was unreliable. Can your brother send me a photo with the laptop? He's shy, doesn't like taking photos. Why does your mother need so many procedures? The healthcare system in Vietnam is complicated, you wouldn't understand. Every question hit a wall. And when I pushed even slightly, Lynn would cry. She'd say I didn't trust her, that I thought she was lying, that if I really loved her, I wouldn't question helping her family. The guilt was effective. I kept sending money, but I started tracking it, not in an obvious way, just a simple spreadsheet I kept on my work computer. Date, amount, stated reason. By September, I was looking at over 35,000 euros sent to Vietnam in less than 2 years. 35,000. That was half my annual salary. That was my entire savings from before we married, plus chunks of my monthly income. I stared at that number during my lunch break one day and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't normal. This couldn't be normal. The credit card statement arrived in October. I'd given Lynn a supplementary card on my account for household expenses, groceries, things she needed. I barely looked at the statements usually, just paid them automatically. But this one came with a fraud alert, asking me to verify some charges. I opened it. 8,000 euros in a single month. High-end boutiques on Maximilianstrasse. Expensive restaurants I'd never heard of. A jewelry store. Cash advances totaling 3,000 euros. We hadn't gone to any of these places together. We barely went anywhere together anymore. I confronted her that night. Tried to stay calm, kept my voice level. Showed her the statement. Asked her to explain. She looked at it and her face did something strange, like she was calculating before responding. Then the tears came. She said she'd been so lonely. She'd made friends with some Vietnamese women who worked at salons and restaurants around Munich. They'd gone shopping together, gone out to eat. She'd wanted to feel pretty, wanted to feel like herself again. She'd borrowed money from these friends and was using the cash advances to pay them back. The story barely held together. Why wouldn't she just tell me she wanted to go shopping? Why hide it? Why borrow from friends when she had access to our account? I asked to see the card. She said she'd lost it. Lost it? When? She didn't know exactly. Maybe a week ago. She'd been meaning to tell me. I felt something crack inside my chest. I called the credit card company right there, with her standing in the kitchen watching me, and froze the card. Reported it as lost. Requested all transactions for the past 6 months. She didn't speak to me for a week after that. Slept on the couch. Moved through the apartment like I was invisible. When I tried to talk to her, she'd put in earbuds and turn away. The isolation was worse than the fights would have been. At least fighting would have meant she cared enough to engage. This was different. This was living with a stranger who resented my existence. She was constantly on her phone now, not even hiding it. Video calls with friends that lasted hours, speaking rapid Vietnamese, laughing at things I couldn't understand, all while sitting 3 meters away from me in perfect silence. I'd hear her voice, animated and bright when she talked to them, and then she'd hang up and the light would just die. Like flipping a switch. The contrast was crushing. My work performance started slipping. I'd catch myself staring at spreadsheets without seeing them, sitting in meetings without processing a word being said. My supervisor pulled me aside in November, asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes automatically. But he looked at me with this expression that was almost pitiful and said, "Thomas, I've known you 8 years. You're not okay. If you need some time off, just say so." I didn't take time off. Work was the only place I didn't have to face what was happening. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at 2, 3 in the morning, listening to her breathing from the couch, running through memories like I was reviewing evidence, trying to figure out when it had gone wrong. Was it something I'd done? Had I failed her somehow? Or had I been failing to see what was really happening all along? One of those nights, lying there in the dark, I opened my banking app and calculated everything. Not just what I'd sent to Vietnam, but her living expenses. The credit card debt I was now paying off in installments. Everything. The number made me feel sick. Over 50,000 euros in 2 years. My savings were gone. I'd started carrying a balance on the credit card for the first time in my life. I was 44 years old and financially worse off than I'd been at 30. I confronted her again the next morning, calmly this time, methodically, printed out bank statements, highlighted the transfers, sat her down at the kitchen table, said I needed to understand what was happening, said I wanted to video call her mother together, right now, to discuss the family finances, to understand what they actually needed versus what was being asked for. That's when she exploded. She called me controlling. Said I was treating her like a child who needed to explain every expense. Then she pivoted, said I was racist, that I was stereotyping Vietnamese people as money-hungry, as scammers. That I'd never really loved her, I just wanted a submissive Asian wife who'd be grateful for scraps. The accusation hit like a punch. I'd worried about that about myself, in my darker moments. Was I one of those men? Had I gone to Asia looking for someone who'd be easier than the women I knew in Germany? The shame of even having that thought had kept me up at night in the early days with Lynn. But I genuinely knew, it wasn't true. I'd fallen for her as a person, for the conversations we'd had, for the way she'd seen me. Or at least, I'd thought she'd seen me. I told her we needed to separate. The words came out flat, rehearsed, because I'd practiced them in my head 100 times. I said maybe she should visit Vietnam for a few months, spend real time with her family, see if the distance gave us both clarity about what we wanted, see if she even wanted this marriage. She agreed immediately. That was what broke me. Not the fight, not the accusations. The speed of her agreement, no tears, no pleading, no, let's try harder, or I don't want to lose you. Just, fine, I'll go. I need money for the ticket and to help my family while I'm there. I gave her 2,000 euros. She booked a flight for January. Said she'd stay for 3 months, maybe 4. I asked if she wanted to come back. She shrugged. Actually shrugged, like the question wasn't important enough for a real answer. That's when I knew for certain. This marriage was over. Maybe it had never really existed. I made an appointment with a family law attorney in December. Frau Bergman was in her 60s, had kind eyes, and a no-nonsense manner that I appreciated. She asked me to walk through everything. How we met, when we married, the financial situation, whether we had children, whether there was a prenuptial agreement. I told her everything. Felt pathetic doing it. A grown man admitting he'd been bled dry by someone half his age who probably never loved him. She didn't judge, just took notes. Asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much have you given her total?" I told her. "Over 50,000 euros. She wrote it down. "Do you have proof of where this money went?" "Some of it," I said. "Bank transfers, receipts she'd shown me, though I couldn't verify if they were legitimate." "Did she contribute financially to the household at all?" "No. She'd gotten her residence permit but never looked for work. Said she needed time to improve her German first, then that she wasn't ready, then that the job market was difficult for foreigners." "And there's no prenuptial agreement?" "No. I'd thought it was unromantic." A sign of distrust. Frau Bergman nodded slowly. She explained the situation in terms I could understand, which I appreciated because the emotions were making it hard to think clearly. Under German law, marriage meant community of property for anything acquired during the marriage. Despite Lynn never working, never contributing financially, she was entitled to half of everything we'd accumulated in 3 years. That included equity in the apartment, savings, even my pension contributions. Plus, I'd be expected to provide spousal support during the divorce process, since she was economically dependent on me. The numbers she outlined made me feel hollow. After everything I'd already given, I'd owe more. Frau Bergman saw my face. She said we could fight it, prove that Lynn had been deceitful, but that would mean a long court battle, expensive legal fees, and no guarantee of winning. The smarter move, she said, was a settlement agreement. Offer her a lump sum to walk away with no further claims. Get it over with quickly and cleanly. We negotiated the offer over 2 weeks. I wanted to be fair. Even knowing what I knew, even feeling what I felt, some part of me still wanted to be generous. Still wanted to prove I wasn't a bad person. We settled on 45,000 euros cash, plus her share of the apartment equity if I sold it, which would be roughly another 25,000. In exchange, she'd sign away any future claims to my income, my pension, anything. 70,000 euros total to make her disappear from my life. It was roughly 1.4 billion Vietnamese dong, a fortune in Vietnam, enough to start a business, buy property, live comfortably for years. The signing was scheduled for December 18th. Frau Bergman would present the documents, we'd both sign, and it would be over. Lynn booked a flight back to Vietnam for the 19th. One day after signing, she'd be gone. Those last 3 weeks of waiting were surreal. We lived as complete strangers. She packed methodically, taking her time, sorting through her things with this deliberate care that suggested she was planning her next life. She seemed lighter, happier even. I'd hear her humming sometimes while she packed, smiling at her phone. She was excited to leave, excited to be done with me. I moved through those weeks in a fog. Friends asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. My mother called, said she'd heard from someone that Lynn was leaving, wanted to know what happened. I gave her the simplest version. It didn't work out. Cultural differences. We wanted different things. My mother didn't push, just said she was sorry and that I deserved better. I wasn't sure I did. The grief was strange because it wasn't grief for Lynn exactly. It was grief for the story I'd believed in. The woman I'd met in Hanoi who'd read French novels and shown me hidden temples. The woman who'd held my hand tentatively and introduced me to her mother. That woman had never existed. She'd been a performance, a role Lynn had played because she needed a visa, needed money, needed a way out, and I'd been the convenient vehicle for her escape. December 17th arrived, the day before signing. I came home from work early, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. I was exhausted of pretending, exhausted of existing in this apartment with someone who hated me. Just one more day. One more day, and it would be over. The apartment was quiet when I walked in. Lynn's door was closed. I could hear her voice, muffled, speaking Vietnamese. Another video call with friends. I'd heard hundreds of these calls over the past year. Usually I'd just go to my room, put on headphones, try to ignore the sound of her being happy with everyone except me. But something made me stop in the hallway. Maybe exhaustion had lowered my defenses. Maybe some survival instinct finally kicked in. I stood outside her door, close enough to hear more clearly. She was laughing. That bright, unguarded laugh I remembered from Hanoi, the one I hadn't heard in over a year. I heard her say something in Vietnamese, then another voice responding through the phone speaker. Her friend. They were talking fast, excited. I caught a phrase I'd learned from my language apps, Ying e mai. Tomorrow. My stomach tightened. I pressed closer to the door. My Vietnamese was limited, barely conversational, but I'd been trying to learn for 3 years, trying to connect with her. Words started filtering through. Money. Tien, stupid, Ingu, German, Ingu. My heart began racing. I strained to hear more clearly, catching fragments, my limited vocabulary piecing together something that made my blood run cold. I stood frozen in the hallway outside her door, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. The conversation continued. Lynn's voice, animated in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. She said something that included numbers. I caught Ming Ti Bien, and my brain translated 1.4. 1.4 billion dong. The settlement amount. She was talking about the settlement. Then, I heard it clearly. My Vietnamese wasn't perfect, but I'd learned enough. She said, Ung mai, toi kai gai tai vai on, tai, jin mai, dong, tar, jin, dong. Tomorrow, I sign the papers and get nearly 1.4 billion dong. The stupid German thinks I loved him. The hallway tilted. I put my other hand against the wall, kept listening, had to hear more, had to be sure. Her friend's voice came through the phone speaker, tinny but clear enough, gleeful, asking something about how long she'd lasted, whether it was worth it. Lynn laughed. That same bright laugh. She said 3 years. Said it felt like longer. Said the hardest part wasn't even pretending to care about him. It was the boredom. Munchen was so boring. Gray and cold and full of boring people doing boring things. Her friend asked something else I couldn't quite catch. Lynn's response was clearer. She said she'd never loved him, not even at the start. She'd seen an opportunity. An older man, recently divorced, lonely, generous with money. She'd researched what to say, how to act. The kind of woman men like him wanted, humble but educated. Traditional but independent. She'd played the part. My legs felt weak. I slid down to sit on the floor, back against the wall, still listening. She kept talking. The dying father story, she said. She'd exaggerated it. Her father had died years before she met me, but she'd made it sound recent. Made it sound like she was still raw from grief. The poor family story was mostly fabricated, too. Her mother owned 2 rental properties in Hanoi's Ba Dinh district. Her brother's tuition was paid by their mother. The money I'd been sending, tens of thousands of euros, she'd been saving most of it. Investing some. Using some for things she actually wanted. She mentioned plastic surgery casually, her nose. I realized then that her nose did look different from our wedding photos. I thought I was misremembering. Her friend asked about the visa. Lynn explained she was 1 year away from permanent residency, but she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't stand another year. 3 years was her limit. She'd take the settlement money, return to Vietnam, use it to open a cafe or boutique, find a proper boyfriend. Someone young, someone attractive. Someone Vietnamese who she'd actually want to touch. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. Someone she'd actually want to touch. Meaning, she hadn't wanted to touch me. Every intimate moment we'd shared, every time I'd held her, kissed her, made love to her, she'd been repulsed. Enduring it. Thinking about money while I was inside her. I couldn't breathe properly, short, shallow breaths that weren't getting enough oxygen. She kept talking, said the intimacy was the worst part. Having to sleep with me. She described me as old, though I was only 44. Said I was boring. Said I smelled like coffee and machinery. Said my body disgusted her, but she'd thought about the money, about the visa, about the long-term plan. It was just business. 3 years of investment for a lifetime payoff. Her friend laughed. Asked if she felt bad. There was a pause. I waited, some desperate part of me hoping she'd say yes. that she'd express even a shred of guilt or humanity. Instead, she said no. Foreign men like me deserved it. She said we'd come to Asia looking for submissive wives, looking to buy love with money. She'd just taken what I offered. It wasn't her fault I was desperate and stupid enough to believe her. More laughter from both of them. They discussed other women they knew who'd done similar things. Marriages to Western men as business ventures. It was common enough that they had terminology for it, strategies they shared. Lynn bragged about her return on investment. 50,000 euros plus the settlement, she said. Plus a German residence permit. Plus she was only 29. She'd start her real life now, the one she'd always wanted. This had just been a detour, a means to an end. I don't know how long I sat there after she ended the call. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 30. Time felt broken. Every memory I had was rewriting itself in real time. Her tears when I proposed, performance, her affection in the early months, calculated. Her mother's blessing, her mother had known, had to have known. The whole family had been in on it, or at least complicit. Every conversation, every kiss, every time she'd looked at me with those soft eyes and said she loved me, all of it had been lies. The intimacy was what destroyed me most. I thought about every vulnerable moment. Every time I'd cried in front of her about my first divorce, about feeling like I wasn't enough, about my fears and insecurities, she'd held me through those moments, stroked my hair, told me I was good enough. And she'd felt nothing, or worse than nothing. Contempt. She'd found me disgusting and let me touch her anyway because the price was right. I thought about the morning routines we'd shared, drinking coffee together before work, me in my robe with my hair sticking up, her in pajamas with no makeup. Those small, intimate moments that aren't sexual but feel more vulnerable somehow. She'd looked at me during those moments and thought I was old, thought I smelled bad, counted down the days until she could leave. The shame was suffocating, not just the money, though that was devastating, not just the wasted years, the shame of being seen, of having someone witness your body, your needs, your loneliness up close and find it all repulsive, of being naked emotionally and physically with someone who was grading your performance the whole time, calculating whether you were worth the effort. I started scrolling through memories like evidence, each one now poisoned. The night in Hanoi when she took me to that temple. Had she even liked that temple? Or just researched good date spots? The way she cried at my proposal. Had she practiced that? Her mother holding my hand. Was that warmth real or rehearsed? Every kiss, every I love you, every moment that had felt like connection, all of it counterfeit. A forged currency I'd been too naive to recognize. And the worst thought, the one that made me want to disappear, I'd chosen this. Some part of me had known something was off, and I'd ignored it. I'd been so desperate not to be alone anymore, so desperate to believe someone could love me, that I'd turned off every warning signal. She'd seen that desperation. Predators sense vulnerability. That's what she was. That's what I'd invited into my life. I had two choices. Burst through the door right now. Confront her with what I'd heard. Force her to admit everything, or say nothing. Let her think she'd won. Let her sign the papers tomorrow believing I was still the stupid, trusting German who'd funded her escape plan. I chose silence. The confrontation would give her nothing I wanted. She'd either deny it, gaslight me, tell me my Vietnamese was wrong, that I'd misunderstood, or she'd admit it proudly. Vindicated, she'd enjoy my pain. She'd get to see me destroyed. Either way, she won. She'd get the money and the satisfaction of knowing she'd broken me. I wouldn't give her that. I stood up quietly, walked to my home office, closed the door, opened my laptop, sent an email to Frau Bergman with the subject line, "Urgent settlement agreement, revision needed." It was 11 at night, but I didn't care. I explained what I'd overheard, every word I could remember, asked if we could revise the settlement terms, asked what my options were. She called me 20 minutes later. I hadn't expected that. She said she'd been working late on another case. She asked me to tell her everything again, slowly. I did. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, like someone else speaking. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "I believe you, and I've heard worse. We need to move quickly." She explained that outright fraud would be difficult to prove, but we could renegotiate based on new information about Lynn's financial situation. She asked if I had any evidence of Lynn conducting unreported business activities. I thought about it, realized I did. Her Instagram account that I barely looked at. She'd been posting for months about an online shopping service. She'd buy luxury items in Germany and resell them to Vietnamese buyers at markup, operating a whole business I'd known nothing about, tax-free, unreported income. Frau Bergman said that was enough. Combined with the suspicious family emergency claims, the credit card fraud, the undisclosed assets in Vietnam, we had leverage, not enough to avoid paying her entirely, but enough to dramatically reduce the settlement. She said she'd draft new documents overnight, have them ready by morning. I should plan to arrive at her office at 8:30, 30 minutes before Lynn was scheduled to arrive for the 9 o'clock signing. I didn't sleep that night, sat in my office chair staring at nothing, watching the sky slowly lighten outside my window. At 6 in the morning, I showered, put on the suit I planned to wear, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table drinking it. Lynn emerged from her room at 8, already dressed, makeup done. She looked beautiful. That was the cruelest part. She was genuinely beautiful, and I'd thought that beauty extended all the way through. But beauty is just surface. It doesn't mean anything about what's underneath. She smiled at me, said, "Ready for today?" in English. Her accent still charming, her expression bright and practiced. I nodded. Didn't trust myself to speak. We drove to Frau Bergman's office in silence. Lynn looked out the window. Seemed relaxed, probably thinking about what she'd do with 1.4 billion dong. What kind of cafe she'd open, what her real boyfriend would look like. At Frau Bergman's office, we were shown into a conference room. Lynn's attorney was already there, a young man she'd hired using money I'd provided for legal fees. Frau Bergman entered with a folder, set it on the table, looked at Lynn with an expression I couldn't quite read, professional but cold. She said, "We've prepared the settlement documents. Please review them carefully before signing." Lynn reached for the papers, still smiling. I watched her face as she scanned the first page, watched the exact moment she realized the numbers were different. The confusion. Then the alarm. Her eyes darted up to me, then to Frau Bergman. "This isn't the amount we discussed," she said slowly, her English suddenly more accented. A slip in the performance. Frau Bergman responded coolly. "Mr. Schmidt has reconsidered the terms based on new information regarding financial discrepancies and undisclosed business activities." Lynn's face went very still. "What information?" I slid a folder across the table. Printouts of her Instagram business. Screenshots of her posts offering shopping services. Bank statements showing patterns that suggested unreported income. A rough transcript, translated with help from a Vietnamese German colleague I'd called at 3 in the morning, of portions of yesterday's phone conversation, not all of it, just enough. She stared at the documents. Her attorney leaned over, reading quickly. His expression shifted from confident to concerned. Lynn looked at me. The performance finally dropped. Her face hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, angry, real. "You recorded me." Her voice sharp now. "I heard you," I said. First words I'd spoken since we'd left the apartment. "Through the door. Speaking to your friend. I understand more Vietnamese than you thought." Silence. Her attorney reviewed the new terms. 15,000 euros cash. No apartment equity. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue fraud investigation, wouldn't report unreported income to tax authorities, wouldn't challenge the family emergency receipts I'd discovered were from a template website. He looked at Lynn, explained in careful German that she could refuse, but Mr. Slow. Schmidt had evidence suggesting misrepresentation. If investigated, she could face legal consequences, possible deportation, definite denial of permanent residency. She could take 15,000 and leave quietly, or risk everything for a court battle she'd likely lose. The math was simple. 15,000 euros was still over 400 million dong, still more money than she'd probably ever had at once. Not the fortune she'd planned for, but not nothing either. She signed, no tears, no apology, no explanation, just angry, sharp strokes of the pen across every page. When she finished, she stood, looked at me once, said in Vietnamese, "Bien ek trong, tuanen, tuanen, you deserve to be lonely." Then she walked out. I never saw her again. She flew to Vietnam the next day, changed her phone number, blocked me on everything, disappeared completely. Months passed. I went through the motions: work, therapy, sleep, repeat. The therapist was helpful this time. She said something that stuck with me. You weren't stupid, you were human. She studied what you needed and became it. That's not naivety on your part. That's predation on hers. The apartment felt empty but honest. No more lies living in the walls. I dated occasionally. A few dinners, nothing serious. Trust was hard. Might always be hard. I caught myself analyzing everything now, looking for tells, for performances. It exhausted me. What haunts me isn't the money. 50,000 euros is significant, but I'll recover financially. It's not even the 3 years, though I'm 47 now, and those years mattered. What haunts me is the knowledge that someone looked at my loneliness and saw opportunity, that my need for connection was a weakness she exploited with surgical precision. That love, for me, was the most real thing I'd ever felt. And for her, it was business. I don't hate Vietnamese women. I don't hate Asian women. I don't hate women generally. I hate that I sometimes, late at night, still miss her. Not the real her. I never knew that person. I miss the lie. The woman who read French novels and held my hand and made me feel seen. That woman never existed. But the grief for her is real anyway. That's the cruelest part of it. Even knowing the truth, even understanding I was a mark from day one, my heart still aches for someone who was never real. I've learned this. Loneliness is a scent. Predators smell it on you. They know how to mirror exactly what you need. They study you like I'd study an engineering problem. They find the weakness in the system and exploit it. And if you're not careful, you'll pay everything you have for the privilege of being deceived. That was Thomas's story. He asked us to share it not because he wants sympathy, but because he knows he's not alone. There are others out there right now, in the honeymoon phase, ignoring the small signs, rationalizing the red flags, desperate to believe they've found something real. If that's you, if something feels slightly off, if the person you love seems just a fraction out of focus, trust that feeling. Your instinct is trying to tell you something. Listen to it before it's too late. And if you've already lived this story, if you're watching this and feeling that sick recognition in your stomach, know this: you're not stupid. You're not weak. You are human in a world that has people willing to weaponize that humanity against you. The shame belongs to them, not you. Drop a comment if this resonated. Share where you're watching from. Subscribe if you want more real stories that cut this deep. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set you free, even when it destroys you first. Thanks for watching Vietnamese Vixens. Until next time.